Mondaire Jones served one term in Congress but was the victim of a squeeze play when then Congressman John Patrick Maloney relocated to his district and then lost to Mike Lawler. He wants his seat back, but Lawler is fighting tooth and nail. And I think it's accurate to say that Mike Lawler is fighting tooth and nail, and he has come out with guns blazing, attacking you for, I think, just about everything. I mean, first of all, he says you have radical friends like AOC and Jamal Bowman. How do you feel when you get attacked like that?
You know, I'm so grateful that we're going to have the opportunity to remind voters in this district of my record, which is one of pragmatism. Voters will recall that I was the guy who helped negotiate passage of the bipartisan infrastructure bill into law, which every single member of the squad voted against at the time. Voters will recall that I've had a staunchly pro-Israel record for my duration in politics, and that is something that we will be reminding people of course. You know, Michael Lawler, he can't point to any aspect of my record, my legislative record, that is extreme, and so he tries to associate me with people who are viewed to be extreme.
So I guess that if you win, you won't be joining the squad?
And did not join the squad the last time I was in Congress, and in fact have been very clear about my disagreements over issues like Israel with the squad, in addition to other issues like the bipartisan infrastructure bill.
Well, just as an aside, so there is another hot race in Westchester. Jamal Bowman has a primary with George Latimer. Are you planning on endorsing in that race?
You know, I think would be premature for me to make a comment one way or the other on that, but I will say that I worked for George Latimer and his administration when I was in the Westchester County Attorney's Office, working to keep taxpayer dollars safe and to make sure that this administration was successful. And I'm really proud of the Latimer administration's record of keeping crime at record lows in Westchester County.
That was a very slick statement where a non-endorsement. Okay, let's talk about Israel, because that's become sort of like the third rail of congressional races, especially in New York City and the suburbs. And I'm wondering, what's your take on what should happen in Israel now in the war with Hamas?
Well, Marcia, let me say, the events of October 7th were horrific. I mean, the worst assault on Jews since the Holocaust. And I think it would behoove everyone to be reminded of the fact that Hamas started this war. As awful as the humanitarian crisis is in Gaza, this is due to the actions of Hamas, which continues to exist. And so long as Hamas, a terrorist organization devoted to the eradication of the Jewish people, continues to exist, the sort of lasting peace and security for both Palestinians and Israelis that people of good conscience would like to see, certainly myself, would be untenable, which is why Hamas has to be eliminated. And the hostages, by the way, which are still being held, most of them still being held captive by Hamas, must be brought home. I was at Westchester Reformed Temple last night, and I spoke with someone who was released, actually, Aviva Siegel. She was a hostage for 51 days in Gaza. And her story is so powerful and her courage is so inspiring. And everyone should hear that, because it would appear that many of the students on these college campuses, for example, have forgotten that Hamas started this war and that there are still hostages, including American hostages, that are being held captive by Hamas, which could just release them any day if they wanted to.
So at the end of the hostilities, whenever that turns out to be, what do you see happening in the Middle East? Do you see a two-state solution? Do you see some kind of demilitarized zone that maybe the United States would have to participate in to keep the two people apart? What do you see, some kind of Israel having a role in running? I mean, where do you see it all ending up?
Well, look, there has to be a commitment from both Palestinians and Israelis to a two-state solution. I do believe that a two-state solution is the only realistic resolution of this conflict, and it is certainly a prerequisite for the lasting peace and security that I worked on when I was a member of Congress. You know, Bibi Netanyahu has said he doesn't want to see a two-state solution. Obviously, Hamas is not committed to a two-state solution. The leadership in Israel is for Israelis to determine. On the Palestinian side, it is critical, it is mission critical that Hamas be defeated and replaced with leadership that is committed to the kind of peace that other Arab nations we are seeing are also increasingly committed to when we look at the normalization of relations between Israel and its Arab neighbors.
Do you think the United States is going to have to play some kind of a role in this two-state solution, maybe patrolling a demilitarized zone to make sure there is no more incursions from either side?
Well, you know, I don't want to get too far ahead of the ball. I do remain very interested in what the American State Department has to say about this matter, what the intelligence community has to say. There has always been, and there will always continue to be, I think, a very significant role for the United States to play in brokering peace in the region. The United States' commitment to Israel must persist. It must continue to be ironclad. And one of the things that's been really distressing for me, as someone who has had the privilege of representing one of the largest Jewish communities in the country, and running yet again to represent this very diverse community, again, in Congress, is to see the politicization of the events of October 7th by my opponent, for example, Mike Lawler, the Republican who developed an interest in this issue because he views it to be in his political interest to drive a wedge between the Jewish community and the Democratic Party, even as his own party, the Republican Party.
Do you think that's going to succeed?
I don't think so. I think it is a tall order to convince people who have been paying attention to the takeover of the Republican Party, largely by neo-Nazis. When you look at Nick Fuentes dining with Donald Trump, when you listen to the rhetoric of Donald Trump and what he has amplified on social media, hearkening back to the Nazi era, repeatedly saying that Jewish people who vote for Democrats are somehow not Jewish enough. I mean, where does he get off saying that? I also see my Republican opponent, Mike Lawler, question implicitly the Jewishness of Chuck Schumer. You know, he repeatedly talks about how Chuck Schumer is the highest ranking Jewish elected official in the country, and then suggests that he is insufficiently supportive of Israel. That's extraordinary.
So let me ask you this question. Congress is now going to be faced with sort of a conundrum, because Bibi Netanyahu is about to make a visit to the United States, and there's a question about whether he should be allowed to address Congress. So I have a two-part question. One, do you think he should be allowed to address Congress? And number two, if you were there, would you attend?
I would absolutely attend. Because here's the thing. You don't have to agree with every single action that the leader of another country does to respect the fact that a people have elected that person to be their leader. And if you're committed, as I am, to a strong U.S.-Israel relationship, you have to be willing to engage. You have to be willing to engage.
So the other issue, I think, is this, that when it comes to the decisions by this administration, they have paused weapons and weapon sales to Israel. How do you come down on that? And do you think that that's something we should do to keep the government in line, or something we shouldn't be doing?
You know, my record in Congress was that of someone who consistently voted for Iron Dome, who was very forceful in supporting the right of Israel to defend itself. Nothing has changed with respect to my perspective. You know, I think the White House has to be very careful with the signal that it sends to any adversary of Israel. And so for me, it's really important that the White House, of course, continue to press the issue of humanitarian crisis when it comes to Gaza with respect to innocent Palestinians, while also continuing to supply Israel all of the resources that it needs in order to defeat Hamas once and for all.
Okay, we're going to have to take a break. We're going to leave it right there for now, but we'll be right back. We're back with Mondaire Jones, who wants to fight Mike Lawler to the death in order to get that seat back. I want to ask you a question. In the last section, we were talking about Donald Trump. And I wonder, you know, there's been polls showing that he's making inroads in the minority community, where people are moving to support him as opposed to their traditional support for a Democrat. Why do you think that's happening?
Well, I think it's really important to just take a step back and make the observation that there have been a number of polls over the past couple of years, and then when elections are held, Democratic candidates for Congress and otherwise have vastly exceeded those expectations if you just do the polling in advance. And so polling is both a snapshot in time, and it can be flawed for a variety of other reasons. Having said that, I know well, as someone who grew up in Section 8 housing and on food stamps, that this economy continues not to work for the vast majority of Americans.
So what should we do about it?
Yeah, well, it starts by allowing people like me to get back into Congress so we can finish the work we started last term, the work of cutting health care costs, protecting Social Security and Medicare, continuing to make sure that we make housing affordable. You know, when I was a freshman member of Congress, we had a functioning majority in the House of Representatives, and we passed legislation like the American Rescue Plan Act and the Infrastructure Bill and the Inflation Reduction Act. One of the things I was able to do was bring hundreds of millions of dollars to my congressional district for schools, housing, and health care. People need to feel like things are different when Democrats are in control. Now, it just so happens that there are some things we can point to, like capping the cost of insulin and the cost of other prescription drugs on Medicare, so that next year no one on Medicare is going to pay more than $2,000 annually for their prescriptions. People need to be educated about that. I'm in rooms all the time. The number of people who say they know about that is very slim when you do a poll of the room. It is also the case that this president has to continue to speak to some of the more unique concerns of communities of color. You know, there are issues.
When he went to Morehouse and some of the other black colleges, he was booed.
Well, I think the expectation of the media was that that Morehouse College commencement speech was going to go a lot worse for the president than it actually did.
But do you think, you know, getting to that point, are you at all worried that younger voters who have been protesting United States involvement in the war and also are fighting for Palestinian rights and to end the death of innocent Palestinians, do you think that those people, having protested, will decide not to vote in the presidential election, which could have a very difficult and problematic effect for President Biden, because these tend to be Democratic voters? Are you worried that these people will stay home and it could throw the election one way or the other?
Well, look, I think there has to be some healthy worry about that, because it's required, I think, to get out the vote and to educate people about all of the wonderful things that this president...
How do you get them to overcome their distaste for what's happening in the Middle East and still go to the polls and still vote?
You explain the stakes to people. You explain the stakes to people. You know, you're talking to someone who was instrumental as one of the younger members of Congress in convincing this president to issue an executive order that would have canceled just a ton of student debt. And still, even after the far-right Supreme Court overturned that executive order, he has canceled over $167 billion and counting. You're talking about a president of the United States who, with my help, signed into law the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest investment in clean energy that any nation has ever made the world over. As people need to know about this stuff, they also need to know this. If you elect Donald Trump, if you let him win by not voting for Joe Biden, you're going to have people in the White House and probably people in the majority still in the House of Representatives and maybe the Senate who are hostile to LGBTQ rights, who are hostile to racial justice, who are hostile to the Affordable Care Act continuing to exist, which allows, as you know, young people to stay on their parents' health insurance plans and forbids, for the time being, unless Trump and Republicans in Congress, like my opponent, are successful, insurance companies from discriminating against people who have pre-existing conditions. The stakes, the stakes, the stakes. And that's what I want people to focus on, and it is incumbent upon the president running for re-election and people like me to explain the stakes.
Well, I also noticed that you didn't even mention SALT, which is something that Donald Trump actually passed, and that, as we both know, was that it made people who limited the amount of taxes you can deduct from that you pay for homeowners taxes and real estate taxes.
You know, when Donald,
which has a big effect, by the way, in the metropolitan New York region.
Absolutely. It is a big priority of mine. In fact, I worked on it and got to the point where I was able to get a provision in Build Back Better, working with people like Tom Suozzi. Obviously, Joe Manchin torpedoed Build Back Better, so we got it through the House, but we didn't get it through the Senate.
But isn't it supposed to expire like soon, like 2025?
It does expire, and guess what? Donald Trump, having capped the SALT deduction, which crushed people in my district, with the help of Republicans in Congress, if he returns to the White House and he has Republican majorities in the House and the Senate, he has said he is going to renew that tax legislation, which means that that cap on the salt deduction will not expire, will not expire. If you want salt relief in the state of New York, you have to have a Democratic majority in the House and in the Senate.
So on another hot topic, congestion pricing, I wonder if you think that the federal transportation officials ought to order another environmental impact statement before congestion pricing goes into effect.
You know, I'm an environmentalist, okay? However, I have been clear from the beginning that if congestion pricing were to go into effect, there should be an exemption for my constituents who do not have adequate public transportation infrastructure. I'm a Rockland guy. I grew up in Rockland County. I spent most of my life in Rockland County. And we don't have a one-seat train ride into Penn Station.
But no, but the MTA board and the mobility board didn't listen to the people who said that.
And so for that reason, congestion pricing should not go into effect.
So what could you do now?
Well, I think it's really incumbent upon people in Albany to listen and for the governor to listen.
Oh, please. Have you been to Albany?
Thankfully, not too often. My opponent, on the other hand, is a creature of Albany. He got his start in politics.
He was an assemblyman.
Where he had a fairly extreme voting record, the same way he's racked up one in the House of Representatives, voting with Marjorie Taylor Greene 80% of the time or more,
but
yet still trying to pretend to be a moderate.
He comes back in one of his commercials and says that you voted with, squad members, AOC 93% of the time, Jamal Bowman 98% of the time. He has those numbers too. So, who's right here?
Well, when we had a functioning Democratic majority, when we had a functioning majority, which was a Democratic majority, I was voting for things like the Inflation Reduction Act and the American Rescue Plan Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill. Mike Lawler, in his 80% of the time voting with Marjorie Taylor Greene, has been voting against abortion without exception for rape or incest. He's been voting to open an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden. So the votes are fundamentally different. We were actually getting things done. And the times when I disagreed, it was because of my support for Israel, which is something that he's trying to suggest implicitly when he says that.
But he seems to think that he has a good record on Israel. Do you disagree with that?
Look, on Israel, we don't have much disagreement, if any, as far as I can tell. But on literally everything else, like whether we should continue to be a democracy in the United States of America or whether Donald Trump should be president of the United States, we have real stark disagreements. Mike Lawler was a convention delegate for Donald Trump in 2016, got paid to re-elect him in 2020, and now was forced to admit recently on CNN that he is supporting him for the third consecutive election cycle, even after January 6th. How do you call yourself moderate when you're out here supporting the guy who tried to overthrow the presidential election, and you're supposed to be a law and order Republican? So he says one thing on television, but you have to watch what he does when the cameras are off.
So we only have about 20 seconds left. If you got elected, what committees would you want to serve on?
I would like to return to the House Judiciary Committee, where I was a leader on that committee, even as a freshman. We've got a lot of work to do still when it comes to banning assault weapons and making our community safer, and I want to get on the Foreign Affairs Committee. And
on that note, we're going to have to leave it right there for now, but our conversation does continue right after the show on our streaming channel, CBS News New York. We are back with another bonus conversation you'll only see here on CBS News New York. These are the fun questions. So, first of all, what's your favorite season?
My favorite season?
Yeah.
Summertime.
Why? What makes it so great?
The weather and just being out, going to barbecues, seeing family and friends.
So it's late, you're tired, you have to whip up dinner. What are we having?
I'm probably making spaghetti.
Spaghetti?
Yeah. It's so easy to make.
So you eat it with tomato sauce?
That's right.
Basically, you open a jar, you throw it in the pan, and dinner's done.
I like to think that it requires more talent than that. But yes, maybe you'll chop up some onions.
Maybe a little cheese.
Yeah. Yes, Parmesan cheese on afterwards.
So who's the bravest person you know or have known?
I got to meet John Lewis once. John Lewis risked his life. He was bludgeoned to the point of unconsciousness as he crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, to get the original Voting Rights Act of 1965 passed. That's bravery.
That's pretty brave. So Have you ever won a prize or a competition for anything?
Oh, yeah. You know, I was named the most legislatively active freshman member of Congress by Axios.
Wow, that's good. Did you ever win like a little trophy or a little?
No, they just published an article one day and justified it, and I felt special.
That's great. So I would just wonder if, like, you know, when you were a kid, if you ever like played soccer and they give you like these little trophies or ribbons.
I did forensic league, which was an oratorical competition in high school, and I won a number of awards.
Really?
I'm a proud graduate of Spring Valley High School in the East Ramapo Central School District.
That puts you squarely in Rockland County, which is a good thing that you're running in Rockland County. So what's the worst job you've ever had? Don't say Congress.
No, that was actually the best job that I had. You know, I really have learned a lot from every single job that I've held. I've been privileged to work at McDonald's as a high school student, and in the Department of Justice, even before I went to law school, working on policy. So I'm going to say I really have enjoyed all my jobs.
Good one. So what's your superpower, a unique quality or skill that you have?
I think I'm good at making people laugh. You know, I'm a jokester, and
I'm tempted to ask you to tell me a joke.
No,
we're not going to do that. What one piece of advice would you give to recent college graduates?
I know that the economy that recent college graduates are inheriting is very different from the economy that our parents' generation inherited. And I know that for many college students who just graduate, that they are crushed with student debt, and they're wondering whether they're going to be able to start families or own homes the way many of their parents did. Keep the faith. Know that people are fighting to build an economy that works for them, and get involved in electing better representation.
There you go. It's vote. The whole point is voting, which, you know, is a big thing because voter turnout is really low in this country, and especially in New York. Yeah. So last question, play tour guide for your district. What are the three, if you were going to take somebody on a tour of your district, what three places would you say are must-see places that you would take them to because you want to highlight the area?
Kensico Dam is gorgeous.
Is that in your district?
It is in the district.
Oh,
I've got the most beautiful congressional district in
One
America,
of my favorite places in the whole world.
Yeah. You know, you certainly want to see the fireworks at Kensico Dam, right?
You do?
Yeah, you definitely want to do that. This is going to sound silly to you maybe, but the Red Lobster in Nanuet in Rockland County.
Why?
It's just so significant to me because I've spent so many graduation and birthdays in that restaurant, and I was really sad to see that it's closing.
What was your favorite meal when you went there?
The Seaside Shrimp Trio, which is, so you get like the fried shrimp, the shrimp scampi, and you get the shrimp pasta too. Is there one other place you'd like to mention that you think is a great place to show people? Oh man, I would go to Terrytown and show people the Tappan Zee Bridge. I call it the Tappan Zee Bridge, not the Mario Cuomo Bridge. Great respect for Mario Cuomo, but I call it the Tappan Zee Bridge, and a lot of folks in the district still do, especially if you're from Rockland. And it's just the most gorgeous view of the Hudson.
It's beautiful.
In Terrytown, yeah, right by the train station.
And I've always liked the Terrytown Music Hall.
Yes, yes, which is also in the district.
It is your district. That's why
I was campaigning out there. Yeah.
So, Mondaire Jones, thank you so much for being with us, and thank you at home for joining us as well.
Thanks for having me.